If you've ever wondered what it feels like to come back from the dead, subscribe and leave a comment below, because this story will make you question everything you think you know about survival, fate, and the strangers who change your life forever. The press conference was Alejandro Garcia's idea. His publicist had suggested something quieter, a short statement, a controlled release of photographs, a carefully worded note about gratitude and reflection. Alejandro had looked at her the way he looked at quarterly reports that disappointed him, with the particular coldness of a man who had never once accepted less than he demanded. "Book the ballroom at the Camino Real," he said. "Full press, every major outlet in Mexico City, noon." That was 3 days after his rescue, 2 days after the doctors cleared him. 1 day after he had eaten a real meal, caldo de res from a street cart outside the hospital in Manzanillo, because the private clinic's kitchen had served him something pale and tasteless that he'd pushed aside without a word. The vendor had recognized him and refused payment. Alejandro left twice the price folded under the empty cup because he had never once accepted something for free, and 96 days of isolation had not changed that either. He was thinner, his cheekbones cut sharper angles beneath the tan, and the navy suit his assistant brought from his Santa Fe penthouse hung slightly loose at the shoulders. But his posture was unchanged, straight, unhurried, occupying space the way a man occupies it when he has never once been told to make himself smaller. His eyes, dark and precise as a calculation, swept the packed ballroom with the same evaluating stillness they had swept boardrooms from Monterrey to Madrid. 96 days on a deserted island off the Colima coast had not, it appeared, softened Alejandro Garcia. "Mr. Garcia, can you describe the moment you realized you were lost?" "I never believed I was lost," he said into the microphone. "I believed the people looking for me were inadequately organized." Uneasy laughter moved through the room. "Reports indicate the Coast Guard suspended the official search after day 30. Do you have any comment?" He had been waiting for this question, the way a chess player waits for the move that opens the game. "I have several comments," he said, "beginning with the fact that I am here, which means someone did not stop looking. I intend to find out who, and when I do, I will make certain that person is properly recognized, and that the people who stopped looking are properly examined." A silence fell over the ballroom that was noticeably different from the silences that had come before it. The cameras continued to flash. Someone in the back row was writing very quickly. 340 kilometers away, in a building that smelled of salt air and old coffee, Valentina Reyes was watching the press conference on her laptop, with the sound turned low and her heart somewhere near her throat. The Coast Guard auxiliary station in Manzanillo was not a glamorous posting. A 2-story concrete building painted the color of old mustard, staffed by 8 people on a good day. Valentina's desk sat on the 2nd floor, wedged between a filing cabinet that hadn't closed properly in 4 years, and a window overlooking the parking lot. And if she leaned left, a small triangle of ocean that she found herself looking at more than was professionally warranted. On her desk, 3 stacking trays, a mug of cold coffee, a notepad covered in her compressed handwriting, and a framed photograph of her mother standing outside their house in Mazatlan, smiling in the particular way her mother smiled when she was trying not to worry. Her title was Administrative Coordinator, Level 2. Her official responsibilities: managing distress signal reports, maintaining communication logs, and making sure someone remembered to order toner for the printer. She was 28. She held a degree in naval systems engineering from the Universidad Autónoma de Sinaloa that she had never mentioned to a single person in this building. She had a 2nd degree, incomplete, in maritime search operations. She did not mention that either. She watched Alejandro Garcia on the screen and pressed her thumbnail to her lower lip. "I intend to find out who." The word sat in her chest like a stone dropped into still water. "Reyes!" Capitan Morales appeared in the doorway with a coffee cup and his permanent frown. "The Campeche relay request is still sitting on your desk. I'll process it in an hour." He looked at her closed laptop then at her with the suspicion of a man who sensed something hidden and had decided not to find out what. He left. Valentina opened the laptop. Alejandro was still speaking. A journalist had asked about the supply packages. 3 waterproof crates found at the island's north edge, stocked with water purification tablets, protein rations, basic medical supplies, and a hand-crank emergency radio. None of it came from any official rescue operation. The Coast Guard search had been suspended at day 30, redirected to a fuel spill in Jalisco. What kept Alejandro Garcia alive through 66 additional days existed on no official record. "The packages are under investigation," he said. "I have retained a private firm. I will have answers." Valentina closed the laptop. She had known this was coming. She had known it for 3 days, since the fishing vessel out of Tacomán radioed in the sighting, and she had stood at this exact desk with shaking hands and something embarrassingly like relief cracking open behind her sternum. She had told herself she was ready. She had prepared responses, rehearsed composure, catalogued likely lines of inquiry, with the methodical thoroughness that had always been, even before anyone tried to take it from her, her essential and defining quality. She had been completely wrong. He arrived 11 days later. Just himself and a driver in a black Suburban with Jalisco plates, pulling into the lot on a Tuesday morning when the Pacific air smelled like rain that hadn't decided to fall. Valentina saw it from her window. She picked up her phone, set it down, picked it up again. Then she smoothed her hair, pulled back in a low knot, as always, straightened her blouse, and walked downstairs at a pace that was professionally unhurried and had absolutely nothing to do with the fact that she could feel her pulse in her fingertips. He was already inside. Morales stood at the front desk, wearing an expression Valentina had never seen on him. It took her a moment to identify it. Something adjacent to awe, filtered through professional resentment. Alejandro Garcia stood with his hands in his pockets, studying the station's operational map as if it were a problem he was already halfway through solving. Grey wool coat over a charcoal suit, taller than the photographs suggested. She'd seen his intake measurements and still hadn't expected the height, which was irrational. And she was not the kind of person who permitted herself irrational responses. The leanness from the island had started to recede. His eyes, dark in every photo she'd studied over 96 days, were in person the very specific brown of old walnut wood, and they moved to her immediately with the particular quality of attention that doesn't ask permission. "Are you the administrative coordinator?" he asked. "Valentina Reyes," she said. "How can I help you, Mr. Garcia?" Something shifted in his expression. A card turned half a degree. "I want the complete communication logs for the search operation under my case number," he said. "Every relay request, every signal report, every outbound authorization, day 1 through recovery. That goes through Federal Access Protocol. I can give you the intake form." "I've submitted the federal request 3 times, he said. "It keeps routing to a department that apparently doesn't exist." "That does sound frustrating." "It is." He studied her. "It's almost as if someone designed the routing to be frustrating." The silence between them had a particular texture, a surface that looked smooth until you touched it. "The intake forms are in the blue tray," Valentina said. "4th one down." He didn't move toward the tray. "The hand-crank radio in the 3rd supply package," he said, "was a Frontline EM-7, naval specification. No civilian supply channel carries it. It's procured exclusively through Maritime Emergency Administration contracts." A pause. "The kind this station manages." Valentina did not blink. She had practiced not blinking. "I wouldn't know about procurement outside my administrative function." "No," Alejandro said, and something in his voice might in another man have approached admiration. "I don't suppose you would." He filled out the intake form in 4 minutes, rapid angular handwriting, and set it in the tray with a precision that suggested he already knew it would disappear into bureaucratic void, and that this was not, in fact, his actual strategy. He looked at her once more before turning to leave. Valentina Reyes, he said, filing the name. Mr. Garcia, she said. Morales exhaled when the Suburban left. Valentina went upstairs and stared at her triangle of ocean. Then she opened the bottom drawer and looked at a folded document she had kept there for 3 years. A discharge notice from the Universidad del Mar's research division, her name at the top. A signature at the bottom she knew very well. She closed the drawer. He was coming back. She was certain of it. She had saved his life from 300 kilometers away, in secret, across 66 days, without once believing he deserved to know she existed. She was beginning to think that had been a mistake. He came back on a Thursday, and this time he didn't stop at the front desk. And Valentina heard the Suburban in the lot at 8:47 in the morning. She was not, she told herself firmly, the kind of person who had started monitoring the parking lot and had exactly 43 seconds to compose her expression before Alejandro Garcia appeared at the top of the stairs with a paper coffee cup in each hand and the focused energy of someone who had already been working for 3 hours. He set one of the cups on her desk. "I didn't ask for coffee," she said. "No," he agreed, settling uninvited into the chair across from her that was technically reserved for visitors with appointments. "You didn't." She looked at the cup. It was from the cafe 2 blocks away, the good one, not the cart on the corner. The one that required walking a specific direction from the parking lot, the kind of observation that required attention she hadn't asked him to pay. "What can I do for you, Mr. Garcia?" "You can stop calling me Mr. Garcia." He opened his own cup. "Alejandro." "Mr. Garcia," she repeated pleasantly. Something moved at the corner of his mouth that stopped just before becoming a smile. "I've been reviewing what I know," he said. "The supply drops followed a very specific delivery pattern, timed intervals, storm window routing, GPS precision within 30 meters. That's not a hobbyist with a boat. That's someone who understood maritime weather modeling and emergency drop protocols." His eyes held hers steadily. "Someone with formal training. There are many people with formal training." "There are," he said. "But the drop coordinates on day 44 hit a specific shelf on the island's northern face that's invisible on commercial satellite maps. It's only on the Naval Survey charts, the ones accessible through Maritime Emergency Administration systems." He tilted his head. "This station's systems." The coffee cup sat untouched between them. "This is all very interesting speculation," Valentina said. "I'm not speculating." He reached into his coat and placed a single sheet of paper on her desk, a communications routing log, partially redacted, with several entries highlighted in yellow. "I have a contact in the Federal Relay Office. Not everything routes through the void." Valentina looked at the sheet without touching it. 3 of the highlighted entries were hers. She could tell from the timestamp format, which she'd customized because the default format was inefficient, which she now recognized as a detail that had been, in hindsight, spectacularly unwise. "You're a very capable administrative coordinator," Alejandro said, and the word administrative landed with a precision that made it mean something else entirely. She looked up at him. "My work is within my assigned responsibilities," she said. "Is it?" "Not a question." He picked up his coffee. "Tell me something. What does Level 2 administrative coordination require in terms of training, secondary education, and 18 months of coastal operations experience?" He drank his coffee. "And the maritime weather modeling software you'd need to calculate optimal storm window routing for emergency supply drops. Is that part of the Level 2 curriculum?" "I wouldn't know about that specifically." "No," he said. "You keep not knowing about very specific things." He was watching her with an expression that was somewhere between professional respect and something warmer that she did not want to examine too closely. "It's a remarkable skill. I'm glad it's useful to someone." "Extremely useful." He set down the cup. "Whoever saved my life is being systematically erased from the record. The routing logs, the procurement authorizations, the drop coordination. Everything is being routed into administrative dead ends or quietly removed." Somebody powerful enough to reach into federal systems wants this person invisible. He paused. I want to understand why. Valentina was quiet for a moment. Outside her window, the Pacific lay grey and enormous under a clouded sky. A pelican sat on the light pole in the lot below with the particular patience of a creature that has made its peace with waiting. She had seen it there before, most mornings. She had never thought much about it until this moment, when she noticed that Alejandro was also looking at it. People in humble positions often make powerful enemies, she said, and did not look at him when she said it. The quality of silence in the room changed. Yes, Alejandro said quietly, they do. He stood, buttoning his coat with the unhurried precision of a man who knew exactly what he'd just heard and intended to sit with it carefully. I'll be in Manzanillo for the rest of the week, he said. I'm staying at the Las Hadas. If you find yourself wanting to not know about something over dinner, I'm in room 412. That's a very creative invitation. I'm a very creative person. He picked up his coffee. The cafe on Avenida Mexico is better than the one by the port, by the way. Their horchata is excellent. I had it this morning while I was deciding which way to walk to get here. He left, taking his questions and his coffee down the stairs. Valentina sat very still. Then she picked up the coffee he'd left on her desk. It was still warm, and it was from the good cafe, and it was exactly how she took it. Single sugar, splash of oat milk, which she had not told him, and which he had therefore either guessed with unsettling accuracy or learned from somewhere she hadn't anticipated. She drank it anyway, because it would have been wasteful not to, and because she was not the kind of person who made decisions based on the quality of a man's attention. She told herself this firmly for the rest of the morning. At lunch, she walked to the portside cafe and ordered the horchata. It was fine, not better than anywhere else. She was back at her desk by 12:45, earlier than usual, and if anyone noticed she had been gone for only 20 minutes, no one said anything. What occupied her for the rest of the afternoon was not the open relay file on her screen. What occupied her was a memory she had spent 3 years filing under irrelevant, and that Alejandro Garcia's presence seemed determined to unfile. A conference room at the Universidad del Mar's research division in Puerto Escondido 3 years and 4 months ago. A project proposal for an integrated emergency maritime response system. Her proposal, 2 years of work, the synthesis of everything she'd learned from both degrees. She had been 24. She had believed, with the certainty of someone who had not yet learned not to, that good work was rewarded. The proposal had been accepted, with modifications, under a different name, specifically under the name of Dr. Rodrigo Vidal, her department head, who had informed her 1 week after submission that her contribution to his project was noted, that junior researchers needed to develop patience, and that if she pursued this through formal channels, she would find the research division's institutional memory somewhat selective about what constituted original work. She had been 24. She had not yet learned what institutional memory looked like when motivated. She had lost her position, her professional references, and 3 years of academic standing in the space of 6 weeks. She had ended up in Manzanillo, in a building that smelled of salt and old coffee, with a title that fit her approximately the way the navy suit had fit Alejandro Garcia. The connection between these events and a man currently staying in room 412 of the Las Hadas was something she had filed under irrelevant for 3 years, and was not prepared to unfile simply because he brought her coffee from the right cafe and paid attention to things she hadn't invited him to notice. She filed it again, firmly, and returned to the relay log. That evening, walking home along the Malecon, as the light went orange over the water, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She almost didn't answer. She stood at the edge of the walkway, with the phone vibrating in her hand, and the ocean moving slowly below, and thought about all the ways this conversation could go, and none of them were straightforward. She answered. I looked up. The Universidad Autónoma de Sinaloa's naval engineering graduates, class of 2019, Alejandro said. There were 12. One of them had her thesis published by the Secretaria de Marina before disappearing completely from any academic or professional record. I found the thesis. It's about integrated emergency maritime response systems and storm window supply routing. The ocean moved beside her, vast and indifferent. "I'm not calling to pressure you," he said, and his voice had shifted into something that was not the boardroom register, not the press conference register, but something quieter underneath both of those. "I'm calling because someone erased you, and I don't think you deserved it, and because you saved my life and I haven't thanked you." Valentina stopped walking. The sun was finishing its descent into the Pacific. Somewhere behind her, a child was laughing. "You don't know that I saved your life," she said. "No," he said. "I don't. Not yet." A pause. "The horchata at the Port Cafe is fine," he said. "I may have been overstating the case for strategic purposes." She closed her eyes briefly. "Good night, Mr. Garcia." "Good night, Valentina." She stood on the Malecon for a long time after she ended the call, watching the last light leave the water, and she did not let herself think about what it meant that his voice, saying her name in that particular quiet register, had rearranged something in her chest that she had believed was very thoroughly and permanently settled. He came back every day that week, not always to the station. On Wednesday, he appeared at the Malecon at 7 in the morning while she was walking before work, apparently also walking before work, which she found implausible given that he was staying at a resort hotel where breakfast was presumably included and the bed presumably excellent. "You're following me," she said. "I'm exercising," he said. "You happen to be exercising in the same direction. This is a public walkway." "It is," he agreed, falling into step beside her as if this had been the arrangement all along. "Beautiful view, actually. I never looked at it properly when I was here before." "When were you here before?" 4 years ago. Acquisition due diligence. 3 days in the hotel conference room. I saw nothing except the conference room and the inside of a car." She looked at the water. The morning was clean and silver and very still. "And now?" she asked. "Now, I'm looking at it." He paused. "I find I look at things differently since the island. Annoying quality in a CEO. Very hard to conduct a hostile acquisition when you keep stopping to observe the light on the water." She glanced at him sideways. There was something genuine in it, not performed, not calculated, that sat uncomfortably beside the image she had constructed of him over 96 days. She had known his professional record, his asset portfolio, his board member relationships, and the emergency contact in his file, which was his mother in Guadalajara. She had not known what he looked like observing the light on the water. "Your board must love that," she said. "My board would benefit from also observing the light on the water," he said. "They would be better humans. They are not, currently, remarkable humans. That's a fairly critical assessment of your colleagues. They are my employees, not my colleagues. The distinction matters." He glanced at her. "Is Morales your colleague or your supervisor?" He signs my timesheets." "That doesn't answer the question." "No," she said, "it doesn't." The corner of his mouth moved. She was beginning to catalogue that movement, which was a problem. They walked in silence. The city was waking around them. A fish vendor unloading from a truck, a woman opening the metal shutter of a taqueria, a dog investigating the base of a palm tree with philosophical patience. "I spoke to the Federal Relay Office yesterday," Alejandro said. His tone had shifted, lighter gone, something deliberate underneath. "My contact told me that someone filed an administrative correction on the case logs 2 days after my rescue was announced. Multiple entries were reclassified under a maintenance protocol that buries them below standard access level." Valentina kept her gaze on the water. "The reclassification was ordered from a Secretaría de Comunicaciones office in Puerto Escondido," he said. She felt the name move through her like cold water. "That's an interesting detail," she said carefully. "The specific office," he said, "is listed under the direction of a Dr. Rodrigo Vidal, recently appointed to an advisory capacity in maritime communications oversight." He looked at her. "A new position?" Created about 4 months ago. The morning light shifted. The dog moved on. You've done significant research, Valentina said. I have significant resources, he said simply. When I decide something matters. The weight of that sentence settled between them with a clarity she couldn't dismiss. She stopped walking. They were at the end of the Malecon, where it curved toward the port, and the Pacific opened wide in front of them, and she stood with the wind off the water moving through her hair and thought, with great precision, about what it would cost her to tell him everything versus what it would cost her not to. Rodrigo Vidal, she said, was my department head at the Universidad del Mar. He took my research, published it under his name, and used his institutional position to end my career before it began. She didn't look at Alejandro when she said it. She looked at the water. He is also the person who 3 years later ordered the erasure of the logs that would show what I did during your case. Silence. Why would he do that now? Alejandro asked. His voice was very quiet. Because he works in maritime communications oversight now. If it came out that a disgraced junior researcher he'd pushed out had been running an unauthorized rescue operation, one that succeeded where official channels failed, it would raise questions about why I was disgraced. She paused. Questions he can't afford. Alejandro was very still beside her. How did you fund the supply drops? He asked. She almost smiled, in spite of everything, always the logistics question. Emergency procurement has a discretionary category for immediate threat scenarios. I wrote 4 separate authorizations across different incident codes over 8 weeks. Each one was below the audit threshold individually, and no one questioned it. I'm very thorough. You're extraordinary, he said, and the word landed without qualification, without boardroom precision or press conference control, just plainly, the way someone states a fact they're finished debating. She turned to look at him then, which was a mistake, because he was looking back at her with the walnut-dark eyes and an expression she hadn't seen in any photograph or press file, and it was an expression she recognized from a place in herself she had spent 3 years building walls around. Don't do that, she said. Do what? Look at me like I'm a problem you've decided to solve. He was quiet for a moment. I'm not looking at you like a problem, he said. She turned back to the water. Her chest felt strange and crowded. I need to get to work, she said. Valentina. He said her name in the quiet register from the phone call, the one underneath the professional layers. Vidal is moving against you. That's why he created the position. He's been watching the investigation inquiries, and he knows I'm close. If I find you before he fully buries the record, he loses the ability to deny everything. She had known this. She had known it for 11 days, since the Suburban first pulled into the lot. She had been calculating it the way she calculated storm windows and drop coordinates, with the precise and terrible clarity of someone who understands systems and what happens when powerful forces move through them. I know, she said. Then let me help you. She looked at him. Why? She asked, not defensively, genuinely. Because you spent 66 days keeping a stranger alive, he said. A stranger who, by your own reasonable assessment, was arrogant, inadequately humble, and probably not worth the effort. I didn't say that. You were thinking it. She had been, in fact, thinking exactly that on day 41, when she rerouted a supply drone around a weather system at 2 in the morning and thought, for approximately 30 seconds, about his press photos at a Monterey gala and questioned her choices. Maybe, she said. I rest my case. He turned back toward the hotel end of the Malecon. Dinner tonight, not room service. I know a place on Avenida Niños Héroes that's not in any guidebook. Bring whatever you have on Vidal. You're very comfortable giving instructions. I'm working on it. He glanced back over his shoulder with something that was almost, but carefully not quite, a smile. Consider it a character flaw I'm actively addressing. She watched him walk away. The Pacific moved beside her, vast and patient, and entirely indifferent to her decision. She did not go to dinner that night. She sat in her apartment, small, in a yellow building 3 blocks from the station, with a balcony that had a view of another building and, if she turned her head at the right angle, a sliver of sky, and she sat with a cup of tea gone cold and thought about what she had seen on the Secretariat's public appointment registry that afternoon when she looked quickly with the practiced casualness of someone who had spent 3 years not looking at certain names in certain databases. His new advisory position gave him access to Federal Maritime Communication Archives, which meant he wasn't just burying current records. He was going back. The discharge notice in her drawer, the thesis registration at the university library, the original research files she had never been able to prove were hers, because proof requires a system that cooperates, and systems, she had learned at 24, do not cooperate for people who threaten the people who run them. There was also someone else to consider. Someone who had called twice that week from a Guadalajara number, whose voicemails Valentina had not played because the caller was Isabella Fuentes, Alejandro Garcia's former fiancée, whose society page photographs had appeared in every major publication during the 18 months they were engaged, and whose father ran a shipping conglomerate with documented ties to the same federal communications ministry that Rodrigo Vidal now advised. The picture it assembled was not one she liked. Her phone sat on the table. Alejandro Garcia's number was in it. She picked it up, put it down. Outside, Manzanillo settled into its nighttime sounds. A television from the next apartment, a motorcycle on the street below, the distant rhythm of the port that never really stopped. She was not the woman she had been at 24. She had learned what institutional power looked like, what it cost, and what fighting it extracted from people who didn't have the resources to absorb the loss. But she had also spent 66 nights recalculating storm windows for a stranger she had never met, driven by the particular conviction that people who were worth saving should be saved, regardless of what it cost. The question, she supposed, was whether she believed that principle applied to herself. She picked up the phone. She called him at 11:17 that night. He answered on the second ring, which meant he had been awake, which she had suspected. "Vidal has Federal Archive access," she said without preamble. "He's going backward through the records, not just the rescue logs, everything. My original thesis registration, the research submission timestamps. If he reaches the Universidad del Mar's internal transfer files, there's a document trail that shows the proposal moved from my faculty folder to his within 48 hours of my submission. It's the only remaining proof of origin." A pause. She could hear faintly the sound of a city, traffic, wind, the particular ambient hum of a hotel room high above Manzanillo. "How long does he have before he reaches those files?" Alejandro asked. "At his current access pace? 4 to 6 days, maybe less if he prioritizes it. Can you move the files before he gets there?" "They're in the university's central archive. I don't have access. I was terminated, but someone with sufficient institutional standing could request a formal preservation hold. It's a legal mechanism. It freezes the records pending a dispute claim." "What do you need for a dispute claim?" "A formal complaint of intellectual property theft filed with the Secretaría de Educación, and a complainant with the legal resources to sustain it through what will be a very motivated defense." She said it plainly, without inflection. She was not asking him for anything. She was presenting facts. She had spent 3 years learning the difference between presenting facts and asking for things, because one of them left her vulnerable and the other did not. Alejandro was quiet for a moment. "I'll have my legal team file the preservation hold tomorrow morning," he said. "I'll need you to send me the archive reference numbers tonight." "Alejandro!" "Valentina." His voice was even. "I spent 96 days alive because you made decisions at 2 in the morning about things that were not your responsibility. Let me handle this part." She sat with that for a moment. Not the calculating kind, but the other kind, the kind that comes after. Then she opened her laptop and began composing the reference list. The preservation hold was filed at 9:15 the following morning. By 11, Rodrigo Vidal's office had submitted a formal objection. By 2 in the afternoon, Alejandro Garcia's legal team, 6 attorneys from a Mexico City firm that specialized in intellectual property and corporate litigation, had responded with a counterfiling that was, by all accounts, significantly more comprehensive. Valentina learned about all of this from Morales, who appeared in her doorway with an expression she had also never seen on him, something between alarm and a complicated, grudging respect. "There are federal communications agents in the building," he said. "I know," she said. "They have questions about procurement authorizations from 3 years ago." "I expected that." Morales studied her. He was not, she had long understood, a stupid man, merely a careful one, and carefulness in his position had evolved, over many years, into a systematic avoidance of information that might require him to act on it. The authorizations were below audit threshold, she said, individually, and the individual making the inquiry has a significant conflict of interest that is currently the subject of a federal dispute filing. She paused. "If the agents have questions, they're welcome to direct them to the legal contact on file. I'll give you the number." Morales looked at her for a long moment. 3 years, he said. 3 years, she agreed. He left without saying anything else, in the particular way of people who have held a silence so long they've forgotten what breaking it would cost. She suspected for the first time that he had known, or suspected, far more than his systematic avoidance had suggested. She found she did not mind. Alejandro arrived at the station at 4 o'clock. He was not alone this time. A woman came with him. Late 50s, silver-streaked hair, the sharp and unhurried elegance of someone who had spent decades being the most formidable person in any room she entered. His legal director, Valentina, would later learn. Her name was Licenciada Carmen Velarde, and she had been practicing corporate law in Mexico City for 30 years, and she looked at Valentina with the particular assessing expression of someone rapidly recalibrating an initial impression. Alejandro looked at Valentina the way he had looked at the operational map on his first visit, as though the problem was already halfway solved, except that his eyes, when they found hers, were not calculating anything at all. "The agents?" he said. "Referred to your legal contact," she said. "They left an hour ago." Carmen Velarde made a small sound that might have been approval. "The university archive hold is confirmed," Alejandro said. "The files are frozen pending the IP dispute. Vidal can't touch them." Valentina nodded. She had known this since the confirmation email arrived at 2:43. She had read it 4 times. "There's something else," she said. She had decided sometime in the early hours of that morning, while the archive reference numbers compiled on her screen, that if she was going to do this, if she was going to let someone help her, she was going to do it completely. No more partial information, no more managed disclosure. She had spent 3 years managing what she revealed, and it had left her precisely as exposed as she was now, only alone. "Isabella Fuentes called me twice this week," she said. The room changed. She watched it happen in Carmen Velarde's expression first, a slight sharpening, and then in the quality of Alejandro's stillness, which became a different kind of stillness. "Why?" he said. Not a question exactly. A word placed very carefully. "I don't know. I didn't listen to the voicemails." She looked at him directly. "Her father's company has procurement contracts with the Secretaría de Comunicaciones, the same ministry Vidal advises. I don't know what the connection is, but I don't believe it's coincidental." Alejandro was very still for a moment. Then he turned to Carmen. "Pull everything on the Fuentes Group's federal contracts from the last 2 years. Already in motion," Carmen said. He looked back at Valentina. Something had shifted in his expression. Not away from her, but toward her, with a directness that had no professional layer over it at all. "You knew about Isabella and didn't tell me," he said. "I knew about Isabella and was deciding whether to trust you," she said. "Those are different things." A silence. "And now?" he asked. She thought about 66 nights, about storm windows calculated in the dark, about a phone she had picked up and put down and picked up again. "Now I've decided," she said. What happened over the next 18 hours dismantled several things simultaneously. It dismantled Rodrigo Vidal's careful architecture of institutional forgetting. Carmen Velarde's team, working with the preservation hold and the original archive timestamps, reconstructed the transfer trail with the precision of people who did this for a living and were very good at it. It dismantled Valentina's careful architecture of self-sufficiency, not violently, not all at once, but in the way that carefully constructed walls sometimes come down, one deliberate stone at a time, chosen by the person who built them. And it began, methodically, to dismantle the connection between the Fuentes group and Rodrigo Vidal's appointment. The connection, once Carmen's team found it, was not subtle. The Fuentes group had submitted the recommendation for Vidal's advisory position. The recommendation had been filed 6 weeks after Alejandro Garcia's rescue announcement, 6 weeks after Alejandro had stated, publicly and on camera, that he intended to find the person who saved him. Isabella Fuentes had known about Valentina. She had known since before Alejandro arrived in Manzanillo. And she had made certain that the person with the power to erase Valentina had the institutional standing to do it. Alejandro read Carmen's preliminary report at his hotel at 2 in the morning and sat with it for a very long time. Then he called Valentina. "Are you awake?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "The Fuentes connection. Isabella knew who you were before I came to Manzanillo. She funded Vidal's position specifically to have you erased before I found you." Valentina was quiet. She had suspected something like this. She had filed it weeks ago under the category of things she would examine when she had the resources to do something about them. She had not fully understood, until this moment, how much it cost to carry that category. "Why?" she said. Her voice was steady. She had a very steady voice. "Because she knew that if I found the person who saved my life," Alejandro said quietly, "I would not stop looking at her." The silence between them on the phone was different from any silence that had come before it. Not the texture of a surface being tested. Something else. Something that had no professional layer and no strategic layer and no layer of careful self-protection on either side. Outside Valentina's window, the port moved in its steady nighttime rhythm. "Alejandro," she said. "I know," he said. I know there's a great deal that's unresolved. I know you have reasons not to trust this. I know that what I feel right now is the most inconvenient possible thing, given everything that is currently happening legally and professionally, and—" "Alejandro." He stopped. "I know," she said. Another silence. Then, very quietly, he said, "I'm coming over." "It's 2 in the morning." "Yes." She looked at the sliver of sky from her balcony. A thin edge of stars above the roofline. "I'll put the coffee on," she said. He arrived at 2:23. She opened the door before he knocked. She had heard his footsteps on the stairs, which she noted with the same internal precision. She noted everything, including the fact that she was noting it. He looked in the doorway of her small apartment in the yellow building, exactly like a man who had been awake for 20 hours, working to dismantle something that had been built specifically to harm her, and who had then driven across a sleeping city at 2 in the morning because he needed to be somewhere specific, and that place was here. She stood back to let him in. He looked at the apartment. It was small, and it was organized with the same compressed efficiency as her desk. Nothing wasted, nothing unnecessary, everything in its precise place. The one exception was the shelf beside the kitchen window, which held 4 plants in varying states of success, and a small painting of the Mazatlan waterfront that was slightly too large for the space and hung at a very slight angle that she had never corrected. "Sit down," she said. "The coffee is almost ready." He sat at a small table. She brought the coffee. They sat across from each other in the particular intimacy of 2 in the morning, which strips away most of the architecture people build between themselves during daylight hours. "Tell me everything," he said, "from the beginning. Not what you've already told me. Everything you decided not to tell me." She looked at him. "That's a significant amount of information," she said. "I have time." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city was almost entirely still. A single set of headlights moved along the street below, then was gone. She told him. She told him about the research proposal, not the summary she had given him on the Malecon, but the full version. 2 years of work. A system she had designed from the ground up, drawing on both degrees and on 3 summers of practical field work on research vessels out of Mazatlan. She told him what it felt like to watch it published under another name, how precise and complete the theft had been, how Vidal had changed enough surface details to make a formal challenge difficult while keeping the core architecture, her architecture, entirely intact. She told him about the formal complaint she had attempted to file, the institutional channels that had been, one by one, quietly closed. She told him about the 6 weeks after, the professional references that didn't return calls, the job applications that reached dead ends she couldn't see but could feel, the decision to stop trying to re-enter a field that had been methodically locked against her and to find something smaller, something below the radar of people with the power to take things. She told him about Manzanillo, about the auxiliary station, about Morales and his studied incuriosity, about the slow, careful process of building a functional life inside a set of constraints that she had not chosen and could not yet change. And she told him about day 1 of his case. The distress beacon activated on a Tuesday morning in July, she said. The fishing vessel that picked up the signal reported it to the Federal Relay Office, who passed it to us for initial assessment. I ran the coordinates. She looked at her coffee cup. The island wasn't on standard commercial maps. It was on the naval survey charts. I knew immediately that the standard search grid would miss it. And you reported that, Alejandro said. I reported it. The report went to Morales, who forwarded it to the Federal Search Coordinator, who noted it and did not adjust the grid. She paused. On day 14, I resubmitted the assessment with updated drift modeling, showing the beacon's likely origin point. The coordinator noted it and did not adjust the grid, and on day 30 they suspended the search. On day 30 they suspended the search. She was very still. The fuel spill in Jalisco was a genuine emergency. The resource reallocation was defensible. I understand the decision. I didn't agree with it. So you acted. I had access to the procurement system. I had the technical knowledge to calculate supply drop windows. I had, she paused for a moment, a very specific feeling that leaving someone on an island that no one else knew existed was not something I was willing to do. Alejandro looked at her across the small table in the small apartment at 2:30 in the morning. You didn't know me, he said. No. You had no reason to believe I was worth the effort. She glanced at him sideways. I had seen your press photographs. And I thought you looked like exactly the kind of person who would be difficult to save and would not thank anyone for it. The corner of his mouth moved. You weren't entirely wrong. You've improved, she said, and she meant it. And the simplicity of meaning it and saying it without strategic management was something she was still getting used to. He reached across the table and set his hand over hers. Not grasping, just there, a deliberate placement, like a card set face up. She looked at his hand for one long moment and at her own beneath it. She did not move her hand away. Carmen Velarde's team submitted the formal intellectual property complaint to the Secretaría de Educación at 9 o'clock the following morning. By noon, the complaint had generated enough institutional attention that Rodrigo Vidal's advisory position was placed under administrative review. The review would take weeks. The legal proceedings would take longer. These were the realities of institutional processes, which moved at the pace of institutions, which is to say, slowly, but with a finality that, when it came, was complete. What was not slow was the press. Carmen had made a strategic decision, discussed with both Valentina and Alejandro at 5 in the morning over Valentina's kitchen table, to share the core story with a journalist at a major national publication before Vidal's team could control the narrative. The journalist in question was known for investigative work on institutional corruption in academic and federal systems. She had been working on a related story for 8 months. She needed 48 hours. They gave her 48 hours. The story ran on a Thursday. Valentina read it at her desk at the auxiliary station, which she had come to that morning the same way she came to it every morning. Smoothed hair, straightened blouse, the walk that was professionally unhurried, and found that the station felt subtly different, as though the building itself understood that something had shifted in what it contained. Morales appeared in her doorway. "The federal agents called," he said. "They're withdrawing the procurement inquiry." "I know," she said. "I received the notification." He stood in the doorway for a moment. He was holding his coffee cup, as always, and wearing his permanent frown, as always, and there was something underneath both of those that she recognized for the first time as something close to respect. "The Campeche relay request," he said. "The one from 3 years ago that I keep pretending to need you to process." She looked at him. "It was processed on the day it arrived," he said. "I just never told anyone." She understood then that Morales had known in the way careful people know things they've decided not to act on for 3 years, had kept the station funded and staffed and running with a level 2 administrative coordinator whose qualifications were quietly 3 levels above the position. "Thank you," she said. It was the first time she had said it to him in 3 years. He nodded once, with the brevity of a man who is not comfortable with thanks, and left. Alejandro called at noon. "The Fuentes group has issued a statement," he said. "Isabella is stepping back from her foundation board. Her father's company is cooperating with the Federal Review." A pause. "She called me this morning." "What did she say?" "That she made a significant error in judgment." His voice was level. "I believe she is primarily concerned with the legal exposure rather than with the error itself, but the outcome is the same." Valentina looked out her window. The parking lot, the triangle of Pacific, the pelican on the light pole. "Are you all right?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. Not the professional quiet, but the other kind. "I spent 4 years with someone I thought I knew," he said. "I apparently knew considerably less than I believed. That's a specific kind of disorienting experience." "Yes," she said. "It is." Another pause. She knew, from the texture of it, what was coming. "I've been offered a speaking engagement in Guadalajara next week," he said. "Before I go, I'd like to take you to dinner. Not the place on Avenida Niños Héroes, though that invitation stands, and will continue to stand for as long as you're willing to decline it." A pause with something warm underneath it. "Somewhere you choose." She looked at her desk. The stacking trays, the photograph of her mother in Mazatlan. "There's a place in the Port District," she said. "Small. It's not in any guidebook either." "Then we're well matched," he said. She closed her eyes briefly. She was not the woman who had sat at this desk 3 weeks ago, watching a press conference, with the sound turned low and her heart near her throat. She was not sure yet who she was becoming. She knew, with the same precision she had always known things that mattered, that she was not frightened of it. 7 o'clock, she said. "I'll send you the address." "Valentina," he said, before she could end the call. "The quiet register. The one underneath everything else." "I know," she said. She did. The dinner was not at 7. Valentina arrived at the restaurant at 7:02, which was early for a dinner reservation, and she knew it, and found Alejandro already there, which she had also somehow known. He was at a corner table with a view of the port, and he stood when she came in, and the way he looked at her when she crossed the room was something she had decided, somewhere between 5 in the morning over her kitchen table and the present moment, to simply accept. It was a small restaurant. Bright tiles, paper lanterns, the smell of garlic and chilies, and the sea. The kind of place that had been in the same family for 3 generations and did not need a guidebook because the people who knew about it told other people who knew about it. In the steady oral tradition of things that are genuinely good, they ate, they talked. Not about the legal proceedings, which were progressing with the methodical finality of institutional processes set in motion correctly. Not about Rodrigo Vidal, whose administrative review had expanded in the 2 weeks since the story ran into a full federal audit. Not about Isabella Fuentes, whose stepping back had been followed quietly by her father's company's cooperation with the review. They talked about other things, about Mazatlan, where Valentina's mother still lived, and where Valentina had grown up catching octopus with her cousins off the rocks below the Malecon. About Guadalajara, where Alejandro's mother had a house with a garden she had been tending for 40 years, and a very strong opinion about the correct way to prepare birria. About the thesis, the real one, the original, which Valentina had explained to him in sufficient detail over coffee at her kitchen table, that he had sat forward in his chair and said, with the focused attention of a man who builds things, "This is actually a better emergency response architecture than what the federal system currently uses." And she had said dryly, "Yes, I know." He had laughed, a real laugh, unguarded, the kind she understood he did not deploy often. She had catalogued it alongside the movement at the corner of his mouth. She had a great many things catalogued now. After dinner, they walked along the port. The night was warm, and the lights of the harbour moved on the water, and the air smelled of salt and something green and far away. "The Secretaría de Marina has an opening," Alejandro said, with the particular casualness of someone who has prepared this sentence and is pretending otherwise. "Senior Systems Consultant, Emergency Response Integration. It was created last month." She looked at the water. "That's an interesting coincidence," she said. "Carmen knows the appointments director," he said. "She may have mentioned that there was a systems engineer in Manzanillo whose work in the area was, in her assessment, some years ahead of current federal practice." "Carmen said that?" Carmen said something considerably more technical that amounted to that." He glanced at her. "I may have also sent the director a copy of your thesis." Valentina stopped walking. "You sent a federal appointments director a copy of my thesis. It's an excellent thesis." "Alejandro, I know," he said. I know I overstepped. You can tell me that. I accept it." He turned to face her. "I also think you've been in a building that smells of old coffee for 3 years when you should have been building something, and I have a significant amount of difficulty watching that continue when I have the ability to change it." She looked at him. The harbour lights moved on the water behind him. The city made its quiet nighttime sounds. "You have a great deal of difficulty," she said, "with the concept of asking before acting. It's a character flaw I'm actively addressing," he said. She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, he was still there, with the walnut-dark eyes and the expression that had no professional layer, and he was close enough that the harbour light was warm on his face, and she had run out of reasons that were more important than this. She kissed him, brief, deliberate, her hand at his jaw, his hand coming up to cover hers. When she stepped back, his expression was something she did not have a catalogue entry for, something new. "I'll take the interview," she said. She got the position. This was not, in the end, surprising to anyone who read her thesis, or reviewed her operational record at the Manzanillo station, or spoke to Capitan Morales, who provided a reference letter that was 3 pages long and remarkably specific, given that he had spent 3 years pretending not to notice anything. She moved to Mexico City in April, to an apartment in Condesa, with a real balcony and an actual view, which she stood on her first morning there and looked at for a long time. It was not the triangle of Pacific visible from the auxiliary station. It was not the same. She found she did not need it to be. The Secretaría de Marina's Emergency Response Integration project was, as she had suspected from the outside, in significant need of the work she had spent years designing before anyone tried to take it from her. She spent the first 3 months rebuilding it from the ground up. Her director referred to her, in a budget meeting she was not supposed to hear, as the best hire the division had made in a decade. She filed this under useful and continued working. Alejandro proposed on a Saturday in June in the garden of his mother's house in Guadalajara, which had been in full bloom and smelled of jasmine and the specific warmth of Jalisco in early summer. His mother, Elena Garcia, 63, with her son's precise dark eyes and a quality of attention that Valentina recognized immediately as familial, had served them café de olla and conchas, and then excused herself with the transparent tact of a woman who had been waiting for this particular Saturday for some months. "I'm going to say something," Alejandro said. "You generally do," Valentina said. "I'm going to say it badly because I have a great deal of practice being correct and very little practice being vulnerable, and I would appreciate it if you didn't." "Alejandro." He stopped. "I know," she said. "You always say that. Because you always say something that requires it." He looked at her across the garden table, with the jasmine behind him and the morning light on his face, and then he reached into his jacket pocket and set a small box on the table between them. "I overstepped again," he said. She looked at the box. She looked at him. "You already bought it before asking," she said. "I bought it 3 weeks ago. I've been carrying it every day since and losing the argument with myself about timing on a daily basis." She picked up the box, opened it. The ring was simple and extraordinary. A single stone, nothing excessive, the kind of thing chosen by someone who had thought about it very specifically and not at all about what would impress anyone else. "This is a character flaw," she said. "I know. You were supposed to ask first. I know. I'm going to say yes," she said, "and I want it noted that I'm saying yes despite the methodology." "Noted," he said, "formally noted, with complete sincerity." She held out her hand. He put the ring on it with the focused attention he brought to everything that mattered to him, which was a quality she had catalogued a very long time ago, at a desk in a building that smelled of salt and old coffee, watching a press conference on a half-volume laptop. "Methodology aside," she said. "Methodology aside," he agreed. They were married in September on the Mazatlan waterfront. Valentina's mother cried from the moment the ceremony began and did not stop until well after it ended, which she attributed to the jasmine in the centerpieces. Elena Garcia watched her son with the expression of a woman who had been waiting for exactly this for years. Morales attended in a suit, held his coffee cup with uncharacteristic gentleness, and stood for a long time looking at the ocean. Carmen Velarde's toast contained one joke about storm window routing versus courtship timelines, and it landed perfectly. Rodrigo Vidal was formally removed from his advisory position in August, pending the federal intellectual property investigation that now bore his name prominently in its title. Certainty in institutional processes takes time. Isabella Fuentes moved to her family's Oaxaca property. Her father's company settled the federal contracts review. She did not contact Alejandro again after the morning she acknowledged her error. Morales was promoted to regional coordinator, a position that had been vacant 2 years, Carmen noted, awaiting exactly 3 pages of specific institutional knowledge about a Coast Guard station on the Colima coast. They named their daughter Marina. She arrived in April, small and absolute, with her mother's precise dark eyes and her father's general conviction that the world should arrange itself to her preferences. She woke at 2 in the morning, reliably and without apology. Valentina held her in those hours, looking at the city lights, and did not for once think about storm windows or preservation holds. She thought about 96 days, about a folded document in a bottom drawer, about a press conference watched on a half-volume laptop in a building that smelled of old coffee and the sea, about all the distances between people that look like geography but are actually something else entirely, about the particular conviction, unreasonable, consistent, and entirely her own, that people who are worth saving should be saved. She held her daughter. Outside the window, Mexico City moved in its vast and intricate nighttime rhythm. She had made, she thought, the right call, made in a building that smelled of salt and coffee by the light of 2 in the morning.